Hello, it is Thursday, January 31st. You are watching K+ in tonight's news. President Nazarbayev announces a day of mourning in honor of the victims of a plane crash near Almaty. Victims' identities are almost established. Expect them to come if you are an owner of 2 apartments. Court officials continue confiscating interest holders' property. In total, 36 families are to be evicted. Almaty commemorates the memory of Mahatma Gandhi. Public activists laid flowers to the Indian people's spiritual leader. In a second day of mourning this month, flags will be flying at half-mast in Kazakhstan today, and entertainment events will be cancelled. President Nazarbayev ordered to pay tribute to those who perished in the CRJ-200 plane crash.
The tragedy claimed the lives of 21 men. The plane belonging to Scott Airlines flying from Kokshetau to Almaty crashed on January 29th at around 1 p.m., 5 kilometers short from the landing lane. Head of the Government Accident Investigation Board held a briefing at Almaty Airport on Wednesday. First Vice Prime Minister of Regional Development Bakhtiyar Sagintayev informed about the course of investigation and expressed his condolences to relatives of the dead on his behalf and on behalf of the President. The black box from the Challenger 200 will be deciphered within 15 days, Deputy Prime Minister Bakhtiyar Sagintayev, head of Government Accident Investigation Board, told a news briefing in Almaty Airport. Flight data recorder has already been sent to Moscow's Interstate Aviation Committee that will be investigating the causes of the air crash. According to prior agreement, the decoding should be completed within 15 days, hopefully earlier. It depends on how fast the experts will do the work. Independent experts will also take part in the investigation. Officials say that $6,500 will be allocated from the budget for compensation. Scott Airlines will pay $20,000 to each affected family. Besides that, local administration officers are to aid in organizing funerals, and air companies will be responsible for transferring the bodies of the dead. The Scott Airlines will pay all compensations according to legislation of the Kazakh Republic. We keep in touch with relatives of the dead, and we will keep the entire situation under control. Identification of bodies was held in the building of the central morgue. The relatives of the dead arrived to the morgue during the day. They were reluctant to speak to reporters. One of the victim's friends said that he had spoken to his friend Vladimir right before he got on the plane. He flew to Kokshetau to his mother's death anniversary. Vladimir was a military man. He was a retired colonel. He was a good man. We'd been friends since '90s. To recap, the plane en route Kokshetau-Almaty crashed on January 29th at Kazaltu village a few miles short of Almaty airport. The crash killed 5 members of the crew and 16 passengers, including a 2-year-old child. Bad weather conditions have been named the primary cause of the accident. The President of Kazakhstan declared 31st of January a day of national mourning.
Scott Airlines opened an account for donations to the families of the crash victims. The aviation company guarantees that all the money will be allocated to the relatives, while reports on the received funds are published in the media. Those wishing to donate may do so with the following bank details on the screen. Head of the parliament's minority faction, Azat Piruvashov, is asking the Kazakh population to avoid mass hysteria or adverse publicity against the airlines because of Tuesday's tragedy near Almaty.
In the lobby after the plenary session of the parliament, the MP suggested awaiting the results of investigation and admitted that after the recent crashes he is afraid to fly himself. Yet it doesn't seem possible to avoid using the aircraft considering our vast territory, he said. In this regard, I would ask you to refrain from organizing mass hysteria, negative propaganda and adverse publicity to airlines. Leave it for the Commission to investigate whether it was the fault of staff or the airline, or maybe it was caused by weather conditions.
The latest tragedy, an earthquake, and a row of other events give rise to the discussion that no one is guaranteed safety from emergency situations in Kazakhstan.
National mourning, disasters and emergency incidents are becoming a norm for Kazakhstan citizens, while an ongoing list of tragedies is calling the state administration's efficiency into question. The politician Bolatabilov tends to lay the blame on the high-ranking government officials' impunity and obvious lack of competence. Had the tragedy happened in any other civilized country, the Ministry of Transportation and the aviation authorities would have already resigned from the office. If the government chair candidates understood they could face a dishonorable discharge any moment, they would probably realize the extent of responsibility. The crash of the Scott Airlines passenger plane provoked numerous speculations about the incident causes. Meanwhile, the experts avoid involving the aspects of safety and airworthiness of Kazakhstan civil aviation. I'm not sure if the weather factors such as poor visibility or low-level flight conditions were even taken into account. Both the aircraft and the crew members were supposed to get a bad weather flight approval. The social activists agree that a number of major life aspects require tightening regulations and increasing the level of governmental control. First of all, it is necessary to stiffen requirements for passenger aircraft, which should encourage the airline companies to opt for new plane models and finally abandon those manufactured in Russia and USSR. Meanwhile, the government critics emphasize that the state authorities' inability to provide an adequate and efficient disaster response results from failure to resolve even the simple routine issues. The authorities can't even clear and maintain the streets, let alone reversing disaster effects. In case of a major calamity, Kazakhstan is likely to follow the path of Haiti, which failed to recover after a severe earthquake because of systematic financial bailout embezzlement. Meanwhile, the disaster consequences are always hardest on regular citizens who started the year with yet another nationwide emergency incident.
In the meantime, President Nazarbayev came down on law enforcement leadership on Wednesday. The head of state demanded to stop groundlessly acquitting criminals. In particular, the national leader was outraged with the fact that murder suspect Batabayev was set free.
He committed the murder but wasn't sentenced even though it was proven that it was a murder. In such case, Bektas, you have to carry out a thorough investigation. The discussion is about Mr. Batabayev, who was acquitted in 2011 but became one of the suspects in the case over mass murder in the El Alatau National Park. Now he was declared wanted. The president directly asked the official whether the suspect was released for a bribe or via personal ties and why none of the security forces haven't been punished. To recap, 12 people were found dead in two closely situated houses of hunters in El Alatau National Park in August of 2012. 6 of them had stab wounds and the bodies of other 6 were burnt. As a result, the prosecutor's office initiated a criminal case and the Interior Ministry stated that the crimes were committed by the members of an extremist religious group, the identities of whom were accurately identified.
Officials in Astana continue visiting new apartment occupants. In certain cases, doors are being broken down, property confiscated, and keys are given to other interest holders. We investigate in depth how the one owner per one apartment decree adopted on April 1st is being implemented in this report.
The guests were expected in this house, yet they weren't welcomed. The court ruled to grant this apartment to another interest holder, questioning why would one family need 2 apartments these days. The fellow interest holders tried to prevent eviction, but young and sporty court marshals managed to pull through. Once inside the apartment, the court marshals began video recording and filing out the seizure of property statement in the presence of witnesses and the new owner. The last one explained that she has been seeking justice for 3 years in court. I've waited 7 years to get this apartment, paying off the mortgage. I have kids as well. This is the brother of the previous landlady. Realizing that the door sooner or later will be forced open, he managed to pack the clothes. She bought 2 apartments, one for herself and one for her mother. However, she only received one. Now it's being seized despite the fact that she paid it off. I don't even know what to say. We only follow the orders, say the court marshals. The landlady was warned a long time ago. Azhar Yermekova has been long aware of the court decision, yet she chose not to comply on purpose. She received warnings repeatedly. Currently, she's not in. Allegedly, she's at work at the moment, yet we had to enforce the court decision. The former deputy Zaudesh Batalova refers to forced evictions as lawlessness. On Tuesday, during the special meeting of interest holders with two apartments, she publicly appealed to the president. Mortgage holders, interest holders and the homeless in general are not criminals, while applying violence against them is delinquent. The president, as a guarantor of the constitution, is responsible for all international standards to be met. Even the eviction shall be performed with the utmost respect, honor and dignity of citizens of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Otherwise, the country doesn't need such a president, such a mayor and such authorities. The authorities, in the meantime, continue solving the housing problems only for Astana residents at other citizens' expenses. The owners of 32 more apartments are awaiting the eviction. They were promised to be reimbursed on the seized apartments by building new apartment blocks. However, people find it hard to believe because they were left without the invested money and legitimately purchased real estate.
In other news, farmers in Pavlodar region are losing cattle due to bad weather. Horses are dying in herds right in the middle of the steppes. Meanwhile, officials claim everything is under control. Farmers, however, beg to differ. More on the losses incurred in this report.
Currently, the remote pastures in the Pavlodar region are deserted since the livestock farmers prefer to keep their cattle in enclosures. According to farmers, the cattle simply cannot reach the pasture, which disappeared under a thick layer of hard snow. Even the old-timers of Pavlodar cannot recall similar unstable weather conditions in the past. In the steppe, snow depth reaches up to a meter, making it impossible to reach the soil. That is why the cattle farmers hurry to drive their herds closer to home. The head of the farm, Amangildi Nurkenov, has already lost several hundred heads of cattle this winter and suffered $1,000 losses. There is no escape. You just sit and watch how the snow falls down and cuts access to the pasture. Aiming to save the rest of the herd, the farmer was forced to drive the cattle to winter stay. However, about 300 or 400 horses still remain in the remote pasture areas. I've been farming for 17 years, mainly raising livestock, and this is the first time in 17 years when I see horses dying in such numbers. Amangildi Nurkenov is not the only victim. According to him, other farmers of this region also face mass death of livestock. The farmer does not blame anyone, but he believes that the government could have warned the farmers about upcoming bad weather. The governor's office in response says that it has done everything in their power. The officials assisted the farmers by providing winter-staying facilities and subsidizing fodder. In order to overcome this issue, we have developed recommendations for farmers on how to save their cattle. First of all, they were advised to relocate their cattle to better pastures, and many farmers did so. Despite the difficult situation in the region, the officials refrain from calling it a famine. According to them, allegedly the statistics on livestock still give grounds for optimism. Apparently, the farmers are the only ones informed about the famine.
The recent appointment of the new Kazakhstan's Federation of Labor Unions chairman surprised not only the activist workers, but colleagues of the movement as well. To recap, former Karaganda region Governor Kusainov received the nod. Even foreign colleagues are asking themselves on what grounds is a former government official now heading a public organization. More on the choices of volition up next.
At the meeting with the leaders of Kazakhstan Federation of Labor Unions, President Nursultan Nazarbayev congratulated an ex-governor of the Karaganda region, Abizgali Kusainov, on his new appointment as chairman of the federation. But labor leaders are really surprised at the appointment, since it is an elected position. The expert of the International Labor Organization, Vsevolod Barbanyagra, gently reminds that the chairman election is actually the case of the organization itself. Thus, the new leader's legitimacy is likely to be questioned.
То, что в средствах массовой информации просочилась формулировка «назначен».
I assume the reporters interpreted the phrase appointed in the way that Kusainov was elected chairman by the General Council of the Labor Unions Federation with its subsequent meeting called.
В скобках назначил на этот пост Генеральный совет Федерации.
However, the head of the Free Labor Unions, Larisa Kharkova, is really concerned about this appointment, saying that the liberal reform of the labor union movement is impossible in the country where an official who has never worked in a labor union can head the whole structure. I link this appointment to the government's attempt to make labor unions easily manipulated and thus paralyze their activity only it opposes the authorities' policy. The Secretary General of the Labor Confederation, Murat Mashkenov, noticed that recently the president has paid more attention to the labor movement reforming. After his article 20 Steps to the Society of Universal Labor, the authorities consider imposing criminal responsibility on labor unions for unresolved disputes. However, Mashkenov doesn't hope for labor unions to communicate. I hope the new leader of the federation will unite all labor organizations and stop the practice of solitude and self-reliance, which hampers to get the real picture of labor union development in Kazakhstan. In the meantime, the leaders of independent labor unions are unanimous, saying that the former loyal head of Labor Confederation, Siazbek Mukashev, has done nothing to develop the labor union movement in the last 20 years. Thus, the Labor and Free Labor Unions confederations decided to unite in a single center without waiting any initiatives from the new leader of the federation.
Lower house parliamentarians raised awareness of national health issues. One deputy proposed to develop a program of active longevity, while another to raise excise taxes on alcohol. Both sent their deputies' request in the name of Prime Minister Serik Akhmetov at the plenary session.
I'd like to draw your attention to the problem of the so-called active longevity in Kazakhstan. According to statistical data, the average life expectancy in our country increased to 70 years. The Kazakhs are a relatively young nation, which doesn't change the urge to create legal premises for providing a decent retirement. Speaking of longevity, I mean long years of quality creative activities for the older generation. While the MP Sarsenov proposed endorsing a life extension government program, his colleague Yergen Doshaev points out ridiculously low prices for alcoholic beverages as the reason behind intemperance of the Kazakhstan population. According to the deputy, around 12,000 Kazakhstan citizens died of alcohol abuse over the last 5 years, and 210,000 people are registered with the drug rehabilitation institutions. Doshaev is convinced that only raising the excise duties and stiffening legislation can improve the current situation. Kazakhstan has the lowest prices for alcohol among the customs union members, all thanks to the low excise duties. In 2012, the excise tax for 1 liter of ethyl alcohol produced in Kazakhstan was as low as 40 cents against $1 in Russia and $2.5 to $2.8 in Belarus. The tax for a half-liter bottle of vodka in Kazakhstan was only 66 cents, while the excise in Russia and Belarus was 2.5 times higher. The situation in beer production industry basically repeats the picture.
Wednesday marked the day of remembrance for Mahatma Gandhi. Flowers were laid at the Indian spiritual leader's monument yesterday morning. Meanwhile, members of the Goodwill People movement spoke to Almaty residents about one of the most iconic personalities of the 20th century.
This small office in the center of Almaty has been receiving visitors all day long, regardless of nationality, religion or race. In silence, they all watched a film about the life of Mahatma Gandhi. The full house is not a priority for the organizers. They remind that even one person may change the world. It's good that people commemorate him in Almaty despite the politics, religion or culture, while the fact that young people became more aware is simply great. 65 years ago, the world was shocked by the news that the leader of the Indian nationalist movement promoting the idea of non-violence was shot point blank by the fanatic Hindu. Mahatma Gandhi managed the impossible as he asserted his country's independence from Britain, bringing peaceful changes. His devotees believe that such political and community leaders are born not more than once in a century. Mahatma Gandhi lived for the cause, whereas the modern politicians are only concerned with power. The problem is that politicians are currently striving for power. They are convinced that coming to power would allow them to resolve problems. However, it isn't quite so. The power by itself doesn't change anything. The main thing is to change people's minds. Gandhi understood this very well, as he had no levers of power and had never been involved with any organizations. He worked directly with people, visiting every village in India. Mahatma Gandhi could have become the role model for contemporary politicians. For instance, during one of the interviews, Vladimir Putin said after the death of Mahatma Gandhi, there is no one to talk to, although it was the ironic statement. Kazakh officials topped it off by comparing the president Nursultan Nazarbayev with Mahatma Gandhi himself. This caused an instant public reaction, majority of which considered it as incorrect. Gandhi is recognized all over the world. Maybe 100 years from now, Nazarbayev will also be remembered. However, he would never be as popular in the world. Let them compare all they want. The truth is, Gandhi lived for the people, while Nazarbayev lives only for himself.
Who does the Vita Industry soybean processing plant belong to? An all but named to limited liability partnership named MS. De jure, however, it belongs to founder Pyotr Potapov, and even though legal wranglings are over, disputes over ownership rights are in full swing. Our reporters spoke with both sides.
The fight over the plant for deprocessing of soybean Vita Industry has been raging for years. The former head of the plant, Pyotr Potapov, insists that his business was illegally seized by the company raider named MS LLC. It hurts my heart when I see how a freeloader from a street suddenly takes over the plant which I've been building for 20 years. The only thing that our entire team wants is to have the plant sold on the open and honest auction as transparent as possible. The new management of the plant doesn't let the former head of the plant and some personnel come inside. Pyotr Potapov even recorded the situation on his mobile phone. The new head of the plant, Vladimir Matveyev, explained that the crisis of the plant was caused by his predecessor. According to him, the crisis managers are still forced to tackle the old issues. The total amount of debt, $313 million, was formed by the group of companies Vita due to reckless actions of company management. That's $313 million debt formed by Mr. Potapov. How could he even talk about it? I just don't understand what kind of seizure are we talking about and how he planned to manage this debt. The CEO of company Alexander Balach, while giving an excursion around the plant, explained that Vita Industry is currently operating and it has paid out the salaries of workers. We are ready to work and resume the processing of crops. We got everything ready to start the operation. Meanwhile, numerous trials over Vita Industry LLC ownership rights came to an end. On January 16 of this year, Pyotr Potapov was reinstated in the position of the company director by the Turksib District Court. However, the current management team is reluctant to return the office to the reinstated manager.
The only falconry center of the post-Soviet region located in Almaty may be on the verge of extinction. The owner of a neighboring private residential estate filed a petition to the prosecutor's office complaining of strong odor and demanding to take down the aviary. On the role of all faction in the conflict, in the story.
The owner of one of the villas located 400 meters away from the falconry center, Sunkar, insists that the nursery's wolves and vultures have become a source of offensive smell. Meanwhile, the private wildlife reserve owners are convinced that the true reason behind the neighbors' complaints is the hawking center's premium location in Ilalatau National Park. A month ago, after the inspection by the local prosecution department officials, the breeder management was accused of improper use of 1.5 hectares of land. I'm convinced that closing the only falcon nursery in Central Asia and the only internationally renowned hawking center in Kazakhstan, introducing people to the world of hunter birds, will negatively affect both the natural balance and the country's reputation. According to the falconry center director, the private reserve, with a 24-year history, had never been subjected to inspections before. The nursery is engaged in breeding hawks, vultures and golden eagles listed as endangered species. The aviary neighbors a horse stable and cages with pet rats, Kazakh hounds and wolves. The latter were starring in Yermek Tursunov's blockbuster Shal, released in 2012. Meanwhile, the prosecution officials find the annoyed neighbors' complaints legitimate, as the rodents bred in the nursery for feeding falcons are known to be human disease carriers. The falcon nursery staff and inhabitants were forced to abide by an ongoing building activity and further remodeling of the 2-story house into a 3-story mansion. In August of 2012, the neighbors suddenly got disrupted by the animal smell. The case against the hawking center has been filed to court.
Finally, an unusual multimedia exhibition organized by the Goethe Institute is held at the Kosteyev State Museum of Arts in Almaty. Guests and residents are invited to dive deep into the world of German music and culture.
The exhibition features 4 major musical directions: techno, hip-hop, pop and indie. Its show floor is equipped with headphones and plasma screens playing the tracks of various German bands. Decorated exhibition stands display biographies of famous musicians. The exposition will be open for visitors till February 21st. Right upon opening, we noticed a genuine interest in the exposition visitors, who truly enjoy discovering something new in the exhibited items. The customizable musical fan badges available to the exposition guests add a really nice touch to this memorable event.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.